I grew up in Forest Hills.
Oh, really? Did you go to PS 101?
I don't know the name of it, but I don't remember the number, but I did go to the public school right
Was
there.
it the one next to the tennis court?
I think you're right about that, because in order to get, the tennis court was on the left when we walked to the shops, to the
Yeah.
stores. And
Oh, so we
everything.
could have seen
The
each other,
school was
except
there.
I'm 10 times older than you.
Where
Not quite.
in Queens?
Not quite.
Where in Queens? did you
I
live?
lived not in Forest Hills, in Rego Park.
Oh, I don't believe it. 63rd Avenue is
Yeah.
where, that's where we live.
Yeah.
102-46, I think it
Wow.
was,
Isn't
63rd
that
Avenue.
interesting?
So we may have, I'm much older
Cross
than you.
paths.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am. I'm, how old am I?
You're 90.
93.
93.
93.
Well, so I'm 84 or something like that.
Should I
don't
bring
know.
the
When you have
picture?
kids, though, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
Oh,
From
yeah,
kindergarten to around fourth grade, something like that.
yeah. I came on at the 4th grade.
Yeah.
I'll bring the picture. I have a picture of the 4th grade.
Fourth
With all
grade's
the
a
kids.
hard grade.
What?
Fourth grade is historically a hard grade for kids, a big transitional grade.
Well, there were so many refugees. We were all refugees.
Well, it certainly doesn't seem to have affected you in a bad way, Ruth.
Oh, no. I was for the Dodgers, but I have never been to a game.
Never into it.
Eventually, maybe we'll have to get you a Red Sox game, huh?
I'll bring the 8th grade picture.
Is there anyone on Zoom?
No, no one on Zoom.
Wow.
No one on Zoom. No one on Zoom. We'll see if anyone else shows. Here's Harleen.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
And here's Connie. We'll see if anyone shows up on Zoom. I'm finding that more and more, the people are not showing up on Zoom, which is fine.
It's Suzanne's on.
Is she? I haven't seen her yet.
Oh,
I hope she'll join us. How are you, Connie?
Sad
Oh, yes, I bet.
from my chef to yours.
Oh, thank you. And this is perfect for today. The commandments.
And
Hello, hello. Come on in, come on in.
Should I move?
Yeah, it's a very sad day.
I'm just getting in the sun. That's
Oh,
all.
yeah.
Being in the sun is a good idea.
Oh, really?
I don't understand why.
my monitor is,
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Is he heat on?
My heat is on in the living room, it's at 73 and I'm cold.
God, I hope you're not coming down with something.
No, this has been all year, no.
Oh, okay.
It's just to the start. And I just tested yesterday, so I'm fine.
All right.
There's Suzanne.
Yeah.
There, Suzanne is on. Great. Hi, Suzanne. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. Now let me just fix it so we can hear you better.
Who's there? Oh, I see.
There we go. Suzanne, say something again, please.
Oh, I forgot.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you.
All right, good. Now wait, are you looking for that? Yeah, the remote. Just in case people can't hear.
No, the Hebrew,
What is that?
I forgot my Hebrew book,
Your Chumash?
the whatever. I usually come loaded with.
You do. Do you want a book?
Yes,
What
but
is-
I don't want you to go.
Well, I don't have to go very far.
How far?
I don't know, maybe to there, maybe to there.
Oh, it's-
So it's not far, I don't think. If you want a book, I can
I'm so,
probably arrange to get you a book. Well, let me see what I've got.
I'm so scattered.
That's okay. Ruth, you get to be scattered. It's okay. All these books are in Russian.
Not yet on your mind, but okay. See, I don't. I
We
don't
have,
know.
we are nice, is. Очень
I
маленькие группы людей, которые, хотя они говорят по-русски, все равно.
You would like it too.
Oh, it's
I
one.
think I
oh
read
my
it.
God. Yes.
I'm getting the new Anne Frank book. Which one? The new Anne Frank book.
Ah.
It's being sent to.
You're getting it your own?
Oh, I want to read
Yeah,
it.
why I didn't bring it.
That's a
Oh, thank you. I'll be better next time. Thank you.
All right, so we will get started. All right,
For some reason.
so remind me of your name?
Morris Ezra.
Boris. Nice
Morris,
to meet you, Boris.
Morris with an M,
Morris.
Morris, okay, good.
with an M.
You would think with this thing I'd be able to hear, but no, I
It's the
still
mask,
can't.
it's the mask.
Oh, it's the mask, okay, so Morris. Nice to meet you, Morris. So I want everyone to meet Jacob Wolf,
Hi.
who is our new volunteer. Hi, Harry.
Hi, Rabbi Jim.
Have you met Jacob yet?
Yeah.
Oh, good, great. Okay, good. So everyone knows Harry?
I know.
Okay, Harry is our social work intern from BC, right? Harry?
That's correct.
Yeah. And Jacob is from Mainz, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
From where?
Mine.
not far from Frankfurt.
Oh,
Where?
von Mainz.
Yeah.
Du sprichst Deutsch.
Near Frankfurt.
Ich spreche
Mainz?
sehr schlecht.
Mine. It's in Germany.
Oh,
It's a town near Frankfurt.
oh, okay.
Suzanne, would you like to say something?
Yes, I messed something up and now I can't see your share screen.
Uh-oh.
But last time, because if I look at the whole group, and then let me see, maybe I can do it now. No. Then I can't see the share screen. So
You know what I'll do, Suzanne, remind me of what your apartment number, and I can send Jacob up to try to help you puzzle it out. Would that be helpful?
no, that would not be helpful.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
All right, maybe I'll
Oh,
go.
you know what I'll do? Let me stop the share and restart. That seemed to work last time, so we'll do that again.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yes, thank
All
you.
right, good. All right, so we're gonna look at, so we have generally been trying to do the traditional Parashat HaShavua, that means the Torah portion of the week. We've been trying to do that the traditional way, which is that once it's been Shabbat, right, we leave the old Parsha behind and we move on to the next Parsha, right? And the way we do that, one of the ways we signal that is that on Saturday morning, we read the Parsha of the week in the synagogue, right? And if we go to a traditional synagogue, then on Saturday afternoon, for the afternoon prayer, we read the first little section of the next week's Parsha, right? It's not even the next week yet, it's still Shabbos, but we're so eager,
Yeah.
right, to get to the next Parsha that we started on Shabbat afternoon. All right, but this week, I don't know, oh, right, because last Monday was a holiday, right? We didn't get to learn Torah. And then, right, it's just, I feel like the holidays have been coming thick and fast. So I figured I didn't want to skip Yitro, which is the part of the Torah where we have the 10 Commandments. So I thought that we would learn Yitro this week, even though I apologize, this is already last week's portion. So we're sort of behind, we're kind of behind the rhythm. So you won't be as prepared for shul on Saturday as you otherwise would be, because we're still stuck in the 10 Commandments, but you'll forgive me. So what I thought we would do is look at some midrashim. We can also look, obviously, at the text of the portion. If people have questions, if things come up and you'd like to look at the portion, I can easily pull it up on the screen to look at. But I thought it would be interesting to look at some midrashim, right? Some rabbinic commentaries on the portion, because this is one of those portions where there's a lot of questions. Why do things work out the way they do? And it also sort of some of the midrashim actually begin to talk about the kind of the nature of God. which I think is always interesting, because the rabbis, of course, are trying to grapple, as we are, with the fact that the God that's presented in the Bible, right, doesn't always seem like a God that we would want to necessarily want to identify with, right? Or maybe that God seems really harsh, right? Or that God seems kind of fantastic, right? And so what does it mean? How do we understand what the Torah is saying about God? And the Midrash is trying to make sense of it, just in much of the way that we try to make sense of it. And luckily, they were really good at making sense of things, or at least raising questions about how to make sense of things. So the rabbis are a great guide for us. All right, so let's look here at some midrashim, starting with the verses that the midrash is based on. So there's actually there's a whole passage that it's based on. So we'll look at this, and then we'll get to some of the midrashim. So this is from Exodus 19, verse 8. And this is the chapter before the 10 Commandments. Can people see this on the screen? Is it big enough? I can try to make it a little bigger.
Yeah, you have to move out of the way, Rabbi.
I need to move out of the way, but I'm in the way. Oh, yeah. That's so funny because the first midrash I brought is all about the fact that Moses is in the way.
You're in good company.
So I'm not the only one in the way. All right, can you see it now, Ruth? Ruth, I'm like directly in your path.
No, it's fine.
It's all right. All right, I'm gonna make it a little bigger, I think. Let me see.
No, I just couldn't see the Hebrew. You were
There we go.
sitting in front of it.
All right, there we go. Okay, so vayanu chol ha'am yachdav, vayomru kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh, vayashev Moshe et divrei ha'am el Adonai. Okay, so all of the people responded as one, yachdav, right, together. Right, this is like a rare moment of unity among the Israelites, right? Jews are not known for being united about much of anything, right? So here is a chance for us to sort of revel in the fact that we were all thinking the same. Everything that Hashem has said, we will do. Right? So there's another famous line, right? Na'aseh v'nishma, right? We will do and we will hear, right? So sort of, and this is not so dissimilar, right? They haven't even heard, right, what God is going to say, but we're in, right? We're in on it, right? Which is very interesting for a whole number of reasons. But one of them, right, is that the relationship between God and the people, right, is really paramount, right? That there is this relationship between God and the people, right? And so in a certain sense, right, the people are not that worried about what the content of the covenant is going to be, right? Because the point is that they want to be in relationship with God. All right. And the Lord said to Moses, right, and just to sort of point out that the rabbis interpret this verse as being that the people really want to hear it right from God, right? They really want to hear the straight dope straight from God's mouth. Right, which is really interesting, right? Because after the 10 Commandments, the people say to Moses, no, you go talk to God, right? Don't let him talk to us because we'll die. So it's very interesting that the rabbis actually really want to focus on the fact that the people want this connection with God, right? Even though the Torah itself says the exact opposite. Now, if you've been reading Midrashim long enough, you know that it's not uncommon for the rabbis to claim something that's then completely contradicted by a verse in the Torah. Right? So this is not that unusual, right? But it is very interesting, right? And we'll get to it. Okay, so later on in the same chapter, the very end of that chapter, leading into the first commandment, right? Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Red Ha'ed Ba'am. All right, so I actually read the entire portion this week in Shul. Usually we only read a third of the portion, but this week Yitro is a special portion, so I read the entire thing. So this is all, it's very much in my head, right? Warn the people not to break through, right? To look at Adonai, lest many of them perish, right? If they go through, they're going to perish, right? And the priests also, right, who come near the Lord, they must stay pure, right, lest the Lord break out against them. But Moses said to Adonai, the people can't come up to Mount Sinai, right? They can't, because you already told us not to let them. So we've already told them all of this. This, you're repeating yourself. You don't have to worry about it. I did what you told me to do. Everything is taken care of. You said, set bounds around the mountain and sanctify. So earlier in chapter 19, Moses is not wrong here. And so, And so Adonai said back to him, go down, just go down and come back together with Aaron, right? Aaron is Moses' brother, right? The priest, but let not the priests or the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. And so Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. And then immediately, right? And God spoke all of these words, saying, right? By Daber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'elelim. All right. So what might be the question that the rabbis have about this passage, or what questions do you have about this passage? You can try to think like a rabbi, or you can just try to think like yourself.
The word harsh,
I'm sorry?
the word harsh bothered me all my life.
Harsh. What's harsh here?
No, it says here, I follow, the nature of God is fantastic and harsh, Exodus 19.
Oh, harsh.
Oh, harsh.
Harsh.
Well, sometimes, right? Sometimes the nature of God can seem harsh.
Yeah,
right?
you have to do certain things to be happy with yourself.
Well, and that's interesting, right? Because who imposes that on you? Is it God or is it you?
No, it's you.
Yeah.
It's a mishigas.
It's the internal mishugas, right? Very often we ascribe to God our own sense of harshness and punishment, right? We ascribe that to God because we don't want to take it for ourselves, right? So questions that you might have. Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, it says, so the Lord said to him, go down and come back together with Aaron.
Yeah.
But let not the priests or the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. In other words, he didn't want anybody else to see him, to be on his holy ground, so to
Right.
speak.
So it's really interesting, right? Because as I said, right, the rabbis are trying to understand this, right? They understand that first verse that I brought, right, is talking about how the people want God directly, right?
Yeah.
And right, they also know, right, that there's you're not supposed to see God.
Yeah.
Right. And God is very concerned about this here, right? Even though he's already told Moses, right? Prepare them, set boundaries, don't let them come close, right? God is still really worried that they're going to come close. Yet the rabbis are trying to really focus on the fact that God is not like what they consider a human king, right? God is different than a human king because God wants to have a direct personal relationship with every Israelite. Whereas a king of flesh and blood, right, would only ever say to his advisor, right, go tell the people this, and I'm not going to go anywhere near them. But we have this problem, right, that the Torah makes a big deal about how God wants all these boundaries. Right? So the rabbis are trying to figure out, well, how can we set up an understanding of God, right, that wants to be as close to the people as we want, right? The rabbis really want to have a close relationship with God.
And don't forget, they're coming from Egypt where gods were idols and you could see them,
Right?
okay, and you could touch them or whatever. And he doesn't want even, he said, only Aaron could go up there,
Right.
but not even the
Well,
priest.
only Moses really is face to face with
Right.
God, right? But the rabbis really want to sort of set up a situation where God is face to face with the people, right? Which is really interesting. So in a sense, everybody is in this, they kind of want everyone to be like Moses and Aaron, right? And we'll get to that. Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
So the role of Moses is really very questionable, I think. It's the interferer. God can't go, I don't know, I cannot go to the Israelites directly. It has to be through an agency.
Yeah. Well, right, and that is, and you're absolutely right. And so you actually just said, right, what the rabbis will say, right, that Moses is in the way, right? Moses is in the way. Moses is standing in the way, right? Whereas it's actually really interesting, right, because in the Torah, it actually feels, right, quite the opposite, right, that the rabbis, that the people are freaked out by God's presence, right? And God is freaked out that the people will be too close, right? Because God wants to protect the people from the power of God, right? Which is too much for the average person, right? The only person who can really withstand the power of God, right, is Moses, and maybe Aaron a little bit too, right? And later Joshua, it's interesting, like who actually warrants being spoken to by God, right? Miriam gets spoken to by God, right? But it's fairly rare, right? All right. So I guess the question the rabbis are going to ask, right, is why is God saying all these things to Moses, right? He says to Moses, go down and make sure no one comes up. And Moses is like, but God, I already did that. You told me to do that and I've done it, right? So then God says, well, go down anyway, right? And the rabbis want to know, well, wait, what is this all about? So this is what they come up with, right? So Moses brought back the words of the people to Israel. So at the beginning, right, he brings it back, right? At that moment, right? At that moment, what did God want to do? He wanted to give the Torah to the people directly. And this is very important, right? This is very important. There's a big debate in Christianity, right, about who can have a true relationship with God, a true relationship with the Bible, right? How can we truly understand the Bible, right? Does it need to go through priests, right? Or can it go directly to people, right? And here, so this is the same debate here, right? Just at the very beginning, right? That the rabbis are identifying, and they're identifying this debate, right, as not something that's happening around them, right, in the Christian world, but something that happened way, way, way back when, right, when God was actually giving the Torah to Israel, right? So at that moment, right, God wanted to give it directly to the people and speak with them directly. And it's actually interesting, in this book, they actually use the word face to face. The word panim el panim is not in the Hebrew, right? It's not here, but they add it into their commentary, right? This is the Art Scroll, by the way, the very orthodox publication. Okay, to speak with them directly, but Moses was standing there, right? And the Holy Blessed One said, wait, what can I do in front of Moses? I mean, like if Moses is standing here, I'm stuck, right? Rabbi Levi said it's analogous to a king who sought to make a royal proclamation without the participation of his advisor. And for whatever reason, I think of the King's Speech. Did everyone remember that movie?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of like how important it was, right, in that movie, right, for the people to hear the King's speech, right, and the king not being able to speak clearly, right, he had a stammer, right, was a real issue, right, because there was something about that direct connection to the people between the leader and the people that really was crucial. And so certainly, right, the king could have said, oh, you know, you prime minister, go say what the king has to say, right? But that just wouldn't have been the same, right? There's something really important about the king himself going and talking, right? So the king said to the advisor, go do this and that, right? And why did he give him this job? Just so that he would go away, right? Not because the job needed to be done, but just because he wanted to get rid of it, right? And the advisor replied, but it's already been done. I did that already. And again, the king addressed the advisor, go call on so-and-so, the legal counselor, go get him, right? And let him come back here with you. And so while the advisor was going to get the counsel, the king did what he wanted to do, which was to address the people directly. Similarly, the Holy Blessed One sought to give the 10 Commandments directly to the Israelites, but Moses was standing alongside God. The Holy Blessed One said to God's self, if I unveil the heavens for the children of Israel, and I say, I am Hashem your God, right, with Moses up here on the mountain, they will say, who is speaking? Right? Is this God speaking, or is it just Moses? Rather, Moses shall descend, and after he's gone, I will say, I am Hashem your God. Right? And therefore, the Holy Blessed One said to Moses as the pretext, descend, warn the people lest they break through to Hashem to see, and a multitude of them will fall. Right? But Moses said, wait, I've already set boundaries for them, as it is stated, for you has warned us. Right? So God said to Moses, go descend, then you will ascend with Aaron. Right? And while Moses was descending, the Holy Blessed One revealed God's self, as it is stated, Moses descended to the people, and immediately God spoke. So what do you think?
Schwer zu sein, Jid.
You'll have to say it in English, Ruth. I apologize.
Hard to be a Jew.
It's hard to be a Jew. Well, it's hard to be Moses, right? It's hard to be Moses. It seems right now, Moses, you can never be in the right place at the right time, right? Like you're such an important part of this whole equation, right? Moses has to do all this work. Yet at the very moment, right, that God is going to reveal God's self, he wants Moses gone, right? Which, you know, again, there is a little bit of a sort of a teaching maybe about leadership here, right? That part of being an effective human leader, right, is also knowing when to make yourself scarce, right? When to get out of the way, right? And let people do things. Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
I watch a lot of History Channel, and there was the biography of Queen Elizabeth before she was the queen. She was a teenager. And even though Winston Churchill was always on the radio talking about the war in Britain, she went on as a teenager, even before she was queen, and she spoke to the people because the people wanted to hear her. Okay, and Winston was not involved in that. He had nothing to do with it. Like his job was over here, and as soon as they heard from her, no matter what he said, they felt calmer. You know, and because she was the queen.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Connie.
To follow up that, I think today's situation is so fraught with danger, it would be good to hear from the president
Yes.
tonight.
Yeah, it's, it's very interesting how, we don't have kings, right? But there is sort of the importance of the leader, and, in FDR, right? It's interesting, we keep on coming back to World War II, right? That FDR had this thing about connecting with people over the radio.
Fireside chats.
Right, and unfortunately, the former president had a way of connecting with his people, through Twitter. Of course, I don't use Twitter, so thank God I was exempt from all of that. But that sort of direct connection of a leader to his or her people is really important. Go ahead, Mickey.
It just seems that this is the beginning of the dumping of Moses and getting ready for a new life, without him, and that's.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That that's really interesting because this year for the first time I had recognized. I mean, probably it's not the first time I've seen it, but it was as if, because if you forget everything, it's great because you're learning everything new all the time. But I learned anew this year, right, that the rabbis sort of state that that Moses was already barred from entering the promised land from even before the Exodus started, right, because of the way that he treated the people right at the beginning, which is really, really interesting, right? And so, which again is sort of another sort of parable about leadership, right? Is that Moses, like any other leader, no matter how great he is, right? And this is one thing that I think leaders, Putin, the Kims, right, in Korea,
They forget.
they forget all the time, right? Is that human leaders are also temporal leaders, right? That they are temporary leaders, right? And one of the big lessons of Moses not entering the promised land, right, is that God goes with the people from the wilderness into the promised land, right? Moses does not, right? Moses is temporary, Moses is human, right? Moses is a leader for the time that Moses is the leader, and when his time comes to an end, he's no longer the leader, right? And that's a very difficult lesson for many human leaders to learn. Yeah, go ahead.
Also, I wonder, was Moses a tool for God, that he used him for this, and now?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I can't help but think of all of the sort of Christian, the right-wing Christian leaders who sort of proclaim, that God is using Donald Trump, right,
Oh, God.
as some sort of a tool, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that wouldn't use the word tool, but I do think, right, again, that Moses is a servant of God, right? Just like all of us, in a sense, in the Jewish imagination, right? We are all servants to God, right? And we each have our own way. It's not easy being a Yid, right? Because, right, we all have service to do, right? And at a certain level, that implies, right, some lack of autonomy, right? And also some lack of, what's the word I'm looking for? That in a sense, like we're all angels in that sense, right? Because we have a task to do. And what it says about angels, right, is that once the angel has done its task, that's the end of the angel, right? You don't, the angel has one thing to do. That's the big difference between humans and angels, right? Is that angels each have one task to do, and then poof, they're done. Humans have many, 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 many things to do, right? And so we don't go poof, right? We tend to live for as long as we live. Yeah, someone had a hand. Yeah, please.
I think what she's saying is right, because at the time when they were leaving Egypt, if just a voice came down and said, go, and do what I say, but they needed a human form.
Yeah,
God needed a representative to speak his words, and even then they didn't believe him.
well,
But,
right.
and he served his purpose, and then you're a baby, you're a teenager, you're an adult, and then somebody else has got to carry the banner on.
Well, right, and it is very complicated, right? Because part of the problem with golden calf, right? I mean, one of the things that the book of Exodus really dramatizes quite well, right, is it's the difficulty of believing and really having faith in a God, meaning like really believing that God is going to be there, right, when you can't see God. Right. And so with the whole story of the golden calf, right, the golden calf in part happens because Moses goes up onto Sinai to get the Torah, right? He's gone for 40 days and 40 nights, and the Israelites say, oh, that man Moses, we haven't seen him in a while, right? He must be gone, so we need a God, right? To what degree did they confuse God with Moses, right? And this is exactly, right, what God is concerned about here, right? God's got a dilemma, right? I need to have a human, right, with a voice and with a form to represent me, because I have neither, right? In a classical Maimonidean understanding of God, right? God doesn't have a voice as we understand voices. God doesn't have a form as we understand a human form, a godly form, right? So God needs that. Yet, if God has that in Moses, then the danger is that people are going to think that Moses is God, right? It's a real dilemma. So if it's not easy to be a yid, it's even harder to be God.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go on and continue with all this stuff. There's kind of one of the great things about Midrashim, right, is that they very often just raise the problem, so to speak, the issue, and then they give us some language to think about it. They don't necessarily give you a pat and easy answer that we can all go home and feel comfortable with, right? It's like, oh, wait, this is a dilemma. We don't know exactly what to do about this. All right, so we're going to continue. And God said all of these words, all of these words, right? And so what does that mean, right? That God does everything at once, right? We'll say it are called bavata chat, right? In one fell swoop, God does everything. So God kills and gives life, harms and heals. God hears the prayers of a woman on a birthing stool, sailors and desert walkers. Is desert spelled right? Yeah. And those bound in jail, right? So God can, we often ask, God must be awfully busy, right? Well, that's one of the ways, right, that God is different from humans, right? Humans, as many scientific studies now demonstrate, right, we don't actually ever multitask, right? All we do is we switch attention, right? We give our full attention for just a second on one thing and then another second, right? We can't actually focus on two things at once. Our brains don't let us do that, right? We can pretend to multitask, right? And some of us do it rather successfully, right? But technically, right, we're never really multitasking because our brains really are our brains, right? They're human. They're not God, whatever God has instead of a brain, right? Where God can actually focus on all kinds of multiple things at once, right? And God can say multiple words at one time. We can really only we can say them really fast, right? One after the other, but God can actually say them at the same time if God wants. Okay, so yeah, please, Vicky.
So that makes God an awesome power.
Yeah.
And that you can't explain it, but you can believe it and believe that people heard it. And also that he uses people from every way of life. He addresses.
Right. And this that you're getting at a midrash that I think is in this list of midrashim that we probably won't get to it today, but that's fine, right? But very important notion, right? That God also can address every person at the level that person can manage, right? So whether it's a king, right, or a slave, whether it's an adult, right, an older person, a baby, right? It's like God is the master of differentiated learning, right? Connie will appreciate that, right? You know, the fact that everyone learns differently, right?
Individual differences.
The individual learning differences are astounding, right? You can only imagine, right? And that's when everyone is the same age, right? Much less when you've got people, you know, people who are 92 and people who are 84, they're so different. So,
I'm 93.
93, I'm sorry, 93.
I'm 94.
And 94 over here, right?
Take 86.
And right, and over at 100 Center Street, you know, there are people in the class that are 104, you know, so like, you know, when she says I'm much older than Judith, okay, 20 years counts, that's a lot.
She's not 20 years old.
All right, so so one in the east and one in the west and one in the north and one in the south, right? So, you know, and this we also get this, right, in the most recent Torah portion, right, where it says, that because the whole world, right, the whole earth is mine, right? So, so I'm everywhere. So it does sort of set up God as this awesome power.
Yeah.
Right. Again, we're getting to a certain extent at how did the rabbis understand God, right? And what verses are they going to choose from the Tanakh, right, to make the points that they want to make? Because they could certainly choose other verses, right, from the Tanakh to make other points. And this is one of the famous motifs in the Torah, in the Talmud and the Midrashim, right, is that the Epicurus will come, you know, the skeptic or the non-believer, right, will come, and what will they do? They'll take a line from Torah, and they'll say, well, it says in the Torah, right, and then the rabbis have to, you know, show off by, you know, squashing that. Yeah, go ahead.
Where does the concept of Beshert come in? If God forms light and creates darkness, I mean, why worry? He's going to take care of it. So you can relax and let it wash over you, and that's the way it's going to be. So don't sweat it. It's already been preordained.
Right. So that's really interesting. So right. So the question you're asking, you seem to be asking the question: does this midrash, based on the verses from the Tanakh that the rabbis bring, is this suggesting that there's predestination and thus we don't need to be active in the world, right? That we can just be passive and let things happen?
Well, not inactive, but don't sweat it because it's already been, but work towards it. That you shouldn't sit back and, you know, close your
right. I mean, of course, that does raise the question, right? Joe Biden has run into this recently, right? He says, well, you know, Putin has put all of the troops on the border of Ukraine. He has to do something. You know, but that doesn't mean, right, that Biden knows, oh, Putin is going to make an attack, right, or Putin is going to withdraw, or, you know, so it may be foreordained, right, but we don't know
what it is.
We don't know what we're working for. Right, go ahead.
But even if it's preordained, within that scope, we have choices.
Right, we always have choices.
Yeah.
Right. It may not feel like much of a choice, right? But we do have choices. Yeah, go ahead.
The idea of getting on a plane and not having to worry about the outcome because it's already been preordained, so you can sit back, relax, enjoy your magazine, your bag of chips, because
Don't sweat it.
Right, because if you're gonna crash into the ocean, you're gonna crash into the ocean, and there's nothing you can do about it anyway. I mean, there is a certain way in which, by putting our lives into the hands of the pilots and the flight attendants, we are doing that. But yeah, I mean, so, right, I mean, I do think, right, to a certain extent, that a lot of the anxiety that assails us, right, does come, right, from a sense of that we should have somehow more control over the world than we do, right? But at the same time, right, it's always a question to me, right? How much control do we have, and how should we assert said control? That that always seems to be a dilemma in a lot of situations, interpersonal and sort of larger. Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
And just a question, God's awareness of everybody and everything, multitasking or whatever it is, but nowhere does it say that God intervenes. So I don't know why, but briefly, very briefly, that was a comfort to me in terms of the Holocaust.
Yes.
That God was aware, maybe suffered watching it, because these other people, really people of the earth, people, and his awareness had to be a burden, but God couldn't intervene.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that sort of, that is a little bit of beyond what's going on here, but it's not that far, right? Because right here, right, it says, right, that God forms light and creates darkness, makes peace and creates evil, right? And if you are familiar with the synagogue service, you will recognize that in Hebrew, right? If I can find it in Hebrew here. Yotzer or uvarei choshech, right? Osei shalom uvarei et hakol, right? As we say it in the prayer, but in Isaiah, it is et hara, right? It is evil, right? So in Isaiah, right, it's very clear, right? And this is a very important, again, the fact that they're bringing this, right? And just to point out, right, that in rabbinic literature, right, it's usually things are abbreviated, right? So what's actually in the Hebrew you see here is Yotzer or uvarei choshech. You have to fill in, right? Osei shalom uvarei et hara, right? You need to fill that in because it's not there, right? But it continues, right? I am Adonai, right? Who makes all of these, right? So, right, and this is a very important point, right? Because it's very tempting sometimes, right, to have this notion that God creates the good stuff and there's some other force that creates the bad stuff, right? The problem with that, right, is that then you have two gods, right? And we only have one, right? So go ahead.
So from Bereshit, when he created the world, there was a day for light and the darkness, and then he created the snake.
Of course.
So there, the snake is, this is what's coming in the world,
Right.
because the snake just in.
Well, and also, right, is that that you if we identify evil, right, as most fundamental as death, right, then you can't have life without death.
Right.
So both are necessary, right? And then also one thing that we like to have tends to be freedom, right, and autonomy, right? So as soon as we have that, right, we're going to have the abuse of that, right? And things are not going to go the way we want them to go, right? And it's very rare, right? We don't see it very often, right? Where we see explicit, in our world at least, explicit divine intervention the way we do in the fight between God and Pharaoh, right? That's not something that gets repeated. That happened once. And it sort of happens all the time. And that's sort of the weird thing, right? Is that there's there's sort of it happened once and it never happens again. And, right, we see this as a kind of a model of liberation that happens again and again in the world. All right. So, all right. So as it said, God makes the Pleiades and Orion, right, in the book of in the book of Amos, right, and this book tells me that those two constellations were seen by the rabbis as being, one was extremely hot and the other one was extremely cold, right? And if you didn't have both, right, you would either freeze to death or burn up to death, right? You need the extreme heat. So there's like an interesting kind of a yin yang kind of dynamic to what the rabbis are saying. So dust, like so, is turned into a person and returned to dust. Right? We all know this from the funeral service, right? A person starts from dust and then returns to dust, returns to the earth, right? And God turned deep darkness into dawn, right? So deep darkness, right? This is the beginning, like the beginning of life, it says. And all the waters of the Nile were turned to blood, and then God turned the blood back into water. Living flesh is turned to a corpse, and the corpse is returned to life. In this book, they say that has to do with leprosy, the biblical version of leprosy. Although you could see it just in general as like the cycles of life, right? That, a tree lives, dies, and then is reborn as a tree, right? It's, someone the other day was talking about, their idea of the afterlife. Their idea of the afterlife was that you come back as a tree.
As a tree.
As a tree.
What
There's
kind of a
worse
tree?
things to come back as.
You come back as anything.
Well, I mean, the staff is turned to a snake, and the snake is returned to a staff. The sea is turned to dry land, and the dry land is returned to the sea, and so on and so forth. All right, so we can just sort of go through these. All right, so come and see that the attributes of the Holy Blessed One are not like the attributes of flesh and blood. Right? A flesh and blood king is not able to make war and to be a scribe and to teach children. Yet with the Holy Blessed One, it is not like this. Yesterday at the sea, God was the war maker, right? God was a hero, right? It's sort of an Odysseus, like an Achilles figure, right? Killing all of the enemy, right? And rescuing all of the Israelites, right? And today, right, God is a man of war. It says in the Song of Seas, right? Adonai ish milchama. But it also says, right, God's strength, God split the sea. Right? And today, right, and remember, right, we just had the splitting of the sea, right, and the final act of the Exodus from Egypt, right? And then the next portion, right, what do we have? We have the giving of Torah, right? And today at the giving of Torah, God descended to teach Torah to God's children. And so it says, right, see, God is beyond reach in God's power. Who governs like God? And this is how we understand this. And God said all of these things, right? That's only God, right, is able to do all of these, have all of these roles, all of these names, right? We have endless names for God, right? In part because only God can we sort of fathom as having all of these different things, right? This is one of the reasons why other ancient peoples, right? They didn't have one God who did everything, right? They had all different kinds of gods that, right? It's just a different way of splitting up the universe. Right? It's a little bit more.
It's more comforting the more you have.
You like lots of gods.
Well, the thing is, we went to Israel in 1949, and we saw people standing. They had made themselves a synagogue. It was a little boat with 11 people. And they were praying from morning to night. And in a way, I was a 10-year-old. And I thought that was very impressive because I was Orthodox. And I thought it was impressive. I didn't think about when do they eat. That was a 10-year-old thinks about food.
Yes, of course, absolutely. But so do the Israelites. right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's one of the things about the Torah that's so interesting, right? Is that there are these moments, right, of great spiritual elevation,
Yeah, and then,
right? And then there are the moments, right, where it's like, well, what are we gonna drink?
yeah,
Right? Where's the water? Right? And so there's a great deal of earthiness in the Torah as well. Is that a 10-year-old thing, or is it just the reaction of someone who's focused on food, right? People who are older can be focused on food also. Yeah, go ahead.
And with what Ruth said, I had a friend who was very orthodox, and they were at some kind of an affair. Her son was about 8 or 9, and he comes back to the table very upset. And his mother said, "What's the matter?" He says, "Ma, I saw the rabbi. He goes to the bathroom." You know, I mean, his whole vision, I don't know what was in his head, but she said it took her a while to calm him down and explain that he's a rabbi, but he is a person.
Right.
Because that child didn't think beyond the form that he saw.
Right.
which was correct.
Yeah, which was, you know, as a
It
10-year-old.
is really interesting. I mean, it's like, I remember this when I saw my grade school teacher in the supermarket.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school. All right, so another explanation, and God said all of these things, saying, and Rabbi Yitzchak said, what the prophets were to prophecy in the future of each generation, they received from Mount Sinai, right? Which is really, so this is another big question, right? In the Jewish world, the big debate in the Talmud, right? Was everything delivered at Sinai, right? And there's no more revelation, right? That was it, right? Or, right, is revelation ongoing? And each generation is not just interpreting what came before, right? But actively receiving renewed revelation. Go ahead, Connie.
The role of the rabbis, though.
Right, well, the rabbis, this is a fight among the rabbis, and the rabbis, of course,
To interpret,
well, they love to reinterpret,
exactly.
right? And one of the reasons that some of them like to say, right, that there was no new revelation is so that their interpretation is the correct one, and that's it.
And schools of rabbinical studies have VODs to receive a she'ela,
Right,
because the questions are constantly coming.
right. Well, and questions are constantly coming up, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't, I mean, technological change, of course, is one reason why, right? But it doesn't take technological change, right? It just takes history, right?
Yeah.
It just takes change, right? And Maimonides is the person who, deals with this on a regular basis.
In the books that I passed over to you, I couldn't get over. One book is just about the negative
Right.
commandments. Who would have thought? Oh,
Yes,
I flipped through it. I didn't know.
right.
There are
So many, right?
negative commandments.
But again, right, so the rabbis come up with a number of commandments, right? How many commandments? You'd think there'd be 10. No, there's like 613, right?
Yeah.
248 positive, and the equivalent, whatever the 613 minus 248, I can never remember, right? Of negative commandments corresponding to the limbs and the sinews or something of the human body, right? So they have this number, right? And then you get these books, right, that identify them, right? So each book has a slightly different collection of what the commandments are, right? And a slightly different understanding of what they mean. Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
I think now that there are yeshivas with the boys, maybe girls too, do it too, really just learn for a lot, that's their occupation,
Yeah,
their avocation to learn, and their minds are different than the minds of my father, say my grandfather, okay? So they have different questions, so this kind of thing can go on forever,
100%. Oh, yeah.
and that's what keeps the Torah
I mean,
alive.
each generation needs to, and so I actually don't think that this argument was everything revealed at Sinai, or is it ongoing revelation? And I don't think the argument that everything was revealed at Sinai is in any way means that there shouldn't be the ongoing conversation about Torah. right? I just think that it's at a slightly higher level. But yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
I think that actually, it's wonderful. It's joyful that there's constant questioning. And for those people who don't want to question, it's fine too. And the constant questioning is part of the maturity of the generations. That generation was accepting it and not questioning. And now as time goes on, we sometimes accept, we often do what we question.
Right.
And I think that's amazing.
Right. I mean, right. It's always fascinating to me, right, that in a sense, this whole sort of na'aseh v'nishma thing, right, that we do and then we'll listen, right, is actually very much a Jewish way of being, right? Because we often will go to shul, right, and then we'll argue about what we hear in shul, right? And so we sort of recognize that the doing, right, is somewhat, it's not completely disconnected, right, from the learning or the believing, right? But they're at different levels, right? That the doing very often is what brings us together, right? It allows us to form a community, right? To sort of say, we're gonna go to shul on Saturday morning and we're not gonna go to the mall, right? Because if we go to the mall, we're not at shul, right? And, or we are gonna get together for Shabbat dinner and connect, right? We're gonna light candles, whatever it is, right? And do we completely agree with all of the theology of that stuff? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because what matters is that we do it and we come together, and then we have the conversation, right? And then we can argue about it. Right? All right, so just to continue this, so we can, because we're almost at time. They received it, but because it said when as Moses said to Israel, but with those here with us standing today and with those not here with us today, it doesn't say at the end of the verse with us standing today, but whether with us today, right? So these are the souls, right? So this is one of the sources where we get the idea, right, that the reason that everything was given at Sinai is because the soul of every Jew was actually at Sinai. So, and what Nikki had mentioned before, right, the differentiated learning part of it, right, that we all heard the Torah that we needed to hear, that our souls needed to hear at Sinai. Each of us was there. Each of us heard our own Torah, right, which is part of the overall Torah, right? Even though they did not exist at that time, each one received that which was, sorry, this is not my translation, that which was theirs, right? Because clearly, right, not just men received Torah, right? The tradition makes that clear, right? So the burden, the prophecy that God spoke to Israel in the hand of Malachi, right? It's not in the days of Malachi, but in the hand of Malachi. Right, as the prophecy was already in his hand from Mount Sinai, but until that time, he was not given permission to prophesy. Likewise, Isaiah. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing because we've got to stop. But just to sort of point out, right, that the idea that everything was given at Sinai doesn't mean at all, right, that there isn't in some sort of sense ongoing revelation. It's just that everything was given then, right? And things are not revealed, right, until it's time, right? So we don't really have any, like, for a great example right now is, does everyone know what Tahara is? So Tahara is the preparation of a body for burial, right? And for all of the generations of Jews that have performed Taharas, right, it's always been that a female, when she dies, right, is prepared for burial by a group of women.
Right.
And a man, when he dies, is prepared for burial by a group of men, right? So in recent years, right, there has arisen a question, what about people who are non-binary?
Oh,
Right?
you're
People who
talking
don't
about
identify, right, as
Male
male or female, right? How do we properly
I hadn't thought of that.
prepare their bodies for burial, right? Now, obviously, there's work on this, right? And people have sort of muddled through, but there is actually now there was a whole group in the liberal Chevra Kadisha in Boston, right, that took on this question to develop the Torah, right? The instruction, the way of dealing with this question, right, which just hadn't come up before, right? So we could say, right, if we want to have ongoing revelation, right, we can say, oh, it's a new question. We need new Torah to deal with this new situation, right? Or we could say, right, the Torah was already always there, right, in the souls of the people who were going to be available to figure it out when the time came, right? We didn't need Isaiah until it was time for Isaiah. We didn't need Malachi until it was time for Malachi, right? But it was all there in the Torah. So again, I'm not making an argument one way or the other. I'm just saying that this is making it very clear, right, that the capaciousness of Torah, right, is not to be limited by what we have in the 5 books of Moses.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
You left us with a zinger.
Sorry?
You left us with a zinger.
Yes.
So the answer, yeah.
So, all right, so we do have to stop, but I'm happy to stay and answer questions. If you need to go, I will not take it amiss if you need to run. Go ahead, Ruth.
So what's the concept that the Torah isn't applicable today because our society is changing so fast? We were talking about that in group, women's group, you know, the line between men and women, or men who think they're women, and all that new category of people. So
Yeah, I mean,
does
I
the
think
Torah
that-
apply to, how does that Torah apply to?
I mean, I think the Torah is, I believe the Torah is sort of endlessly renewable, right? That there's the wisdom, obviously, the people who wrote the Torah down weren't thinking about things
Right.
exactly the way that we think about them, because we're talking thousands of years ago.
That's
right.
my question.
But at the same time, they were people and we are people, and there's, I don't think people don't change that much, right? Lots of things change, but I think that we can still be in conversation with all the generations that came before us. And the more that we are, I think the more sure-footed we will be as we approach the issues that we're looking at today. That's just my sense of it.
Yes, you go.
All right, thank you,
Go on,
everybody.
Rabbi. Thank you. Wow. Yeah. That's a whole nother concept.
Bye-bye, everybody.